Good morning and welcome to All Out Politics. What do you do with a problem called Nigel Farage? The politician who said he wants his life back is once again in the political limelight. He has become the first British politician, indeed European politician, to meet the president-elect. And now the Prime Minister is coming under pressure to use him as a way of reaching out to Team Trump. Britain's Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson sounded upbeat about Mr. Trump's presidency as he arrived in Brussels for a meeting of EU foreign ministers.
Well, I think there's a lot to be positive about, and it's very important not to prejudge the president-elect or his administration. It's only a few days since the election has taken place. I think we all need to wait and see what they come up with. But I think we should regard it as a moment of opportunity. This is a time when I think, as the Prime Minister is saying today, when all sorts of there's a big change going on in the world. People who feel they haven't been properly listened to, properly represented, are starting to make their voices heard. It's up to us, up to everybody to listen to them and to take things forward in a positive way. Look, Donald Trump, as I've said before, is a deal maker, and I think that can be a good thing for Britain, but it can also be a good thing for Europe, and that's, I think, what we need to focus on today.
Well, with me is the former Conservative Foreign Secretary, Sir Malcolm Rifkin. Welcome to you.
Good morning.
Are you feeling positive about President Trump?
I'm feeling slightly less frenetic than I was a week ago, in the sense that the first signs are that he recognizes that being president is not the same as being a celebrity, and therefore he's been making rational and moderate and reasonable statements. But of course, a president who can abandon all his pledges during his campaign within hours of becoming the president-elect could abandon what he's saying now at some future date equally cavalierly. So there's still the jury out in quite a big way.
He does still seem to feel that there's a need for a reckoning within NATO as to who pays for what. Do you think that's fair? That's
the single biggest thing I worry about. Of course, he's right, and it's nothing particularly original to say that a lot of European countries, not the United Kingdom, not France, and quite a number, don't pay their fair due. And he's quite right, as previous presidents have done, to bring pressure on that particular issue. But where he crossed a very dangerous line was implying that the commitment of NATO and of the United States to come to the support of any member that was attacked should not be taken for granted. And that was very, very foolish, because that's giving a green light to Mr. Putin, who's already thought to be a chump.
Is a small country like a Baltic state can't possibly pay for the military might which would be required to hold off Russia.
And the Baltic states happen to have pledged themselves to reach the 2% within a year or so, have introduced conscription. They're doing all they can, but they're tiny. And in the sense, the Baltic states are rather like Berlin during the Cold War. There was no way in which West Berlin by itself could have been defended physically. However, the Russians knew, the Soviet Union knew, you attack West Berlin, you have a major crisis with the whole Western alliance, and that's what's at risk here.
Now, what about Nigel Farage? I mean, he you know, we've seen the pictures.
We're going from the sublime to something slightly different.
Well, yeah, but I mean, British governments are always very anxious to build up good relations with new presidents, to maintain a special relationship. And there it is. I mean, we can see it there. I mean, they clearly do have a special relationship. Is there any role, official role, for Nigel Farage, do you think?
I've got nothing against Nigel Farage. I'm not going to say rude things about him. No, I'm not going to. But he's a celebrity. That photograph you were looking at just now was two celebrities meeting together. Now, he wasn't invited by Mr. Trump to come to New York. He arrived at Trump Towers and said, could I see him? And of course, having appeared as a strong supporter during the actual presidential campaign, Trump agreed to see him. And from a celebrity point of view, it was a coup.
No, but I mean, it does go further than that, in as much as...
No, it doesn't.
Well...
Look, let me explain why it doesn't.
Mr. Trump repeatedly identified himself with the mood of Brexit.
Yeah, sure.
Nigel Farage has been on American television kind of talking about all of that.
Then let's hope he continues to appear on American television and says helpful pro-British things. Good luck to him if that's what he wants to do. But in terms of, is he a serious interlocutor between the British government and the president-elect, the British government doesn't need him. The Prime Minister has already had a conversation with the President. The President's invited her to Washington. The President's already already made clear that even amongst Western countries, the United Kingdom is the country he feels closest to for obvious reasons I didn't go into. I think the main thing that I hope will happen, if I may make a separate, but what I think is a very fundamental point. We've just been discussing NATO and the possible and the deep anxiety about NATO. I hope that Mrs. May, as Prime Minister, will use the same kind of initiative that Mrs. Thatcher did with President Reagan. She went to see Reagan about Gorbachev. We all remember Reagan saying, coming from anyone else, I wouldn't have paid much attention, but coming from the Iron Lady, I thought we better start perhaps thinking about what she's advising. I hope that Mrs. May will use Britain's particular links with the United States to have as early as possible contact with Mr. Trump in order to impress upon him, when he is at a very impressionable stage, that the whole future of America's leadership of the world depends on the commitment to NATO.
Well, Sir Malcolm, stay with us because we're joined now by Tamara Cohen. She's looking ahead to the Guildhall speech tonight by the Prime Minister, which is the first major statement on foreign policy since Mrs. May became Prime Minister in the summer. What's she going to say?
Well, she's trying to change focus a bit and talk about Britain's role in the world outside the European Union as a champion of free trade. But we've also got the start of how she's going to be engaging with Donald Trump, saying his victory will allow Britain to seize new opportunities. She's talking about change in the air on both sides of the Atlantic. When people want change, politicians have to deliver it. It's just interesting because obviously this is an audience of business leaders in a glittering event in the city. A lot of them are nervous about the single market, and she needs to reassure them that she's unashamedly pro-business. But she's also delivering a bit of a warning about how not everyone is a winner from globalisation. So a bit of what she's saying tonight we've got here, which is as we leave the European Union, we will also use the strength and size of our economy to lead the way in getting out into the world and doing new business with old allies and new partners alike. To be the true global champion of free trade in this new modern world, we also need to do something to help those families and communities who can actually lose out from it. So she's going to be talking about people feeling their wages have been undercut, people who feel that their communities are changing because of immigration, and also having a pop at businesses who try to game the system.
Well, 2 points coming out of that. Thanks, Tamara. 2 points coming out of that, Sir Malcolm. The first is there really a big business opportunity for Britain as a result of coming out of Brexit and coming out of the European Union, in your view?
Well, there is a business opportunity, but exactly what we've just heard the Prime Minister going to say this evening indicates one area of difference between her position, Prime Minister's position, and Mr. Trump's. She has described rightly Britain as a global champion of free trade. Now, if we take literally what Mr. Trump's been saying during the campaign, he's going to try and demolish all the various international agreements on free trade that the United States is associated with and go back to a sort of protectionism, an America First policy, which, whatever else it is not free trade.
And she is, however, picking up on one Trump theme, which is that globalisation, liberal economic policy of doing as much international trade as possible, freedom of movement people, yes, has left people behind, has damaged people, and there is a backlash against that.
And that's a common theme in the United States as well as in the United Kingdom. One very positive thing, if Mr. Trump means this, is he has said that far from Britain being at the end of the queue for a bilateral free trade agreement between the United States and the United Kingdom, Britain would be top of the list. Now, the importance of that is, although we cannot sign such a deal until we've actually left the EU, if there is a willingness to start the talks now, all the preliminary, or at least a lot of the preliminary work, can be done over the next year or so, next couple of years, so that we will be ready to have a free trade agreement with the United States very shortly after leaving the EU. Now, we've not been able to do that with the EU itself. They've said they will not even start talking until Article 50 is applied. That is not the American position, and that offers a great opportunity.
It does seem that in some ways the Conservative Party and UKIP is drawing closer together. I mean, after all, they're backing the same candidate in the Richmond Park by-election. Mr. Farage started out as a young Conservative. Do you think he'd actually really like to merge the two parties?
I very much doubt it, but I think UKIP, if it has had a historical purpose, it's largely
So if it
expired.
folded back into the Tory party, would that worry
Well,
you?
it never came from the Tory party directly, and in fact UKIP's main threat at the moment isn't to Tory votes. As we saw in the north of England, its main threat is picking up disillusioned Labour voters, as it did during the Brexit referendum itself. And they're not people who would vote Conservative under any circumstances in the foreseeable future. So UKIP has no obvious reason to see the Tory party as its
But if you've got a
natural
party with people like, I don't know, Daniel Hannan in it, why not have Nigel Farage? They're pretty much the same.
Well, I don't quite see it that way. Daniel Hannan, I've got quite a lot of time for. He has offered a lot of creative thinking in the political world. I don't always agree with him, but he's always fascinating to listen to. Nigel Farage is a great operator, and he's been a very impressive operator during the whole Brexit issues, and all credit to what he helped deliver from his point of view. I don't see that he has actually much to offer in terms of a post-Brexit UK, which is what we're all committed to.
It's Malcolm Rifkin, Dan Tamara, thank you both very much indeed.